Hi, welcome to Actually Panicking. Today we'll be covering Chapter 1, Thinking Critically with Psychological Science. The chapter begins by talking about intuition. Intuition is an effortless, immediate, automatic feeling or thought, as contrasted with explicit, conscious reasoning. The hindsight bias, also known as the "I knew it all along" phenomenon, is the tendency to believe, after learning an outcome, that one would have foreseen it. Finding out that something has happened makes it seem inevitable. Thus, after learning the results of a study in psychology, they may seem to be obvious common sense. However, experiments have found that events seem far less obvious and predictable beforehand than in hindsight. Sometimes, psychological findings even jolt our common sense. Our everyday thinking is also limited by our tendency to think we know more than we do. Asked how sure we are of our answers to factual questions, we tend to be more confident than correct. Experts' prediction of world events made with 80% confidence were right less than 40% of the time. Another limitation in everyday thinking is the tendency to believe that there are order in random events because random sequences often don't look random. In actual random sequences, patterns and streaks occur more often than people expect. The scientific attitude reflects a hard-headed curiosity to explore and understand the world without being fooled by it. The eagerness to skeptically scrutinize competing claims requires humility because it means we may have to reject our own ideas. This attitude, coupled with scientific principles for sifting reality from fantasy, helps us winnow sense from nonsense. It carries into everyday life as critical thinking, in which we examine assumptions, appraise the source, discern hidden values, evaluate evidence, and assess conclusions. Next, we go into theory. A useful theory is an explanation using an integrated set of principles that effectively organizes a wide range of observations and implies testable predictions, called hypotheses. By enabling us to test and reject or revise a particular theory, such predictions give directions to research. They specify in advance what results would support theory and what results would disconfirm it. As an additional check on their own biases, psychologists report their results precisely with clear operational definitions of concepts. Research variables allow others to replicate or repeat their observations. Often, research leads to a revised theory that better organizes and predicts observable behaviors or events. The case study is the method by which psychologists analyze one or more individuals in great depth in the hope of revealing things true of us all. While individual cases can suggest fruitful ideas, any given individual may be atypical, making a case misleading. Naturalistic observation consists of observing and recording behavior in natural environments. Like the case study and survey methods, this research method describes behavior but does not explain it. The survey looks at many cases in less depth and asks people to report their behavior or opinions. Asking questions is tricky because even subtle changes in the order or wording of questions can dramatically affect responses. In everyday experience, we're tempted to generalize from a few vivid but unrepresentative cases. The survey ascertains the self-reported attitudes or behaviors of a population by questioning a representative, random sample. When surveys and naturalistic observations reveal that one trait or behavior accompanies another, we say the two correlate. A correlation coefficient is a statistical measure of the relationship between two things from -1 to +1. A positive correlation indicates a direct relationship, meaning that two things increase together or decrease together. A negative correlation indicates an inverse relationship. As one thing increased, the other decreased. As one thing decreased, the other increased. Researchers depict scores on graphs called scatter plots. Each point plots the value of two variables. The correlation coefficient helps us to see the world more clearly by revealing the extent to which two things correlate. Noticing and recalling confirming instances of relationships results in illusory correlations. Illusory correlations feed an illusion of control, that chance events are subject to our personal control. The illusion that we can control uncontrollable events is fed by a statistical phenomenon called regression towards the mean, the tendency for unusual events, including emotions, to return to their average state. Perhaps the most irresistible thinking error is to assume that correlation proves causation. Correlation reveals how close two things vary together and thus how well one predicts the other. However, the fact that events are correlated does not mean that one causes the other. Thus, while correlation enables prediction, it does not provide explanation. The experiment is a research method in which the investigator manipulates one or more factors to observe their effect on some behavior or mental processes, while controlling other relevant factors. If a factor changes when we vary an experiment factor, then we know the factor is having a causal effect. In many experiments, control is achieved by randomly assigning people to either an experimental group, which is exposed to the treatment, or a control group, which is not exposed. Often, the research participants are blind about what treatment, if any, they're receiving. One group might receive the treatment, while the other group receives an inert placebo, a pseudo-treatment. Often, both the participant and the research assistant who collects the data will not know which condition the participant is in. This is called the double-blind procedure. The placebo effect is well documented. Just thinking one's receiving treatment can lead to symptom relief. A variable is anything that varies. The independent variable is the experimental factor that's manipulated. It's the variable whose effect is being studied. The dependent variable is the variable that may change in response to manipulations of the independent variable. It's the outcome factor. Confounding variables are factors other than the independent variable that might produce an effect. The experimenter intends the lab experiment to be a simplified reality, one in which important features can be simulated or controlled. The experiment's purpose is to not recreate the exact behaviors of everyday life, but to test theoretical principles. It's the resulting principles, not the specific findings, that help explain many behaviors. Some psychologists study animals out of an interest in animal behaviors. Others do so because knowledge of the physiological and psychological processes of animals enables them to better understand the similar processes that operate in humans. The debate between animal protection organizations and researchers has raised two important issues. Is it right to place the well-being of humans above that of animals? What safeguards are in place to protect the well-being of animals in research? Many professional organizations and funding agencies have developed extensive guidelines for the humane use of animals. In their statement of ethical principles for the treatment of human participants, the US APA and Britain's BPS urge investigators to obtain informed consent, to protect participants from harm and discomfort, to treat information about individuals confidentially, and to fully explain the research afterwards. Psychologists' values can influence their choice of research topic, their theories and observations, their interpretations, and their professional advice. Knowledge is a power that can be used for good or evil. Applications of psychology's principles have so far mostly for the good, and psychology addresses some of humanity's greatest problems and deepest longings. Researchers use descriptive statistics to organize their data meaningfully. Measures of central tendency neatly summarize data. The mode is the most frequently occurring score in a distribution. The mean is the math average of a distribution, obtained by adding the scores and dividing by the number of scores. If the distribution is skewed by even a few extreme scores, the mean will be biased. The median is the middle score in a distribution. Half the scores are above it and half are below it. The range of scores, the gap between the lowest and the highest score, provides only a rough estimate of variation. The more standard measure of how scores deviate from one another is called the standard deviation, which describes how much scores vary around the mean score. It better gauges whether scores are packed together or dispersed because it uses information from each score. Many types of scores are distributed along a bell-shaped distribution, or a normal curve. Roughly 68% of cases fall within one standard deviation of the mean. About 95% fall within two standard deviations. Please memorize those numbers: 68, 95, and 99.7. Lastly, psychologists use tests of statistical significance to help them determine whether differences between two groups are reliable. When the averages of the samples drawn from the groups are reliable, and the difference between them is relatively large, we say the difference has statistical significance. This means the difference very likely reflects a real difference and is not due to chance. That's it for today's episode. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.